The morning sun had barely peeked over the horizon when Dr. Maya Richardson pulled up to the private airport terminal in her electric car. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from the hospital in Seattle, reminding her that her patient's surgery window was getting tighter by the hour. She grabbed her small leather briefcase, smoothed down her navy blazer, and walked with purpose toward the terminal entrance. The click of her sensible heels echoed through the quiet building as she approached the check-in counter. Behind the desk, a young man barely looked up from his computer screen as she cleared her throat. "Good morning. I'm here for the 6:30 a.m. charter to Seattle," she said, sliding over her identification and flight documentation. The clerk glanced at her papers, then did a double take, looking between her face and the documents with obvious skepticism. "There must be some mistake," he said, his voice carrying a note of dismissal that Maya had heard too many times before. "This flight is reserved for Dr. Richardson." "Yes, that's correct. I'm Dr. Richardson," she replied calmly, pulling out her medical license and hospital ID badge. "I have an emergency surgery scheduled in Seattle this afternoon." Before she could explain further, a well-dressed businessman waiting nearby stepped forward, his face twisted with concern. "Is everything all right here?" he asked the clerk, pointedly ignoring Maya's presence. "I couldn't help but notice this situation." The clerk picked up his phone, and within minutes, 2 security guards appeared, their hands resting casually on their belts. "Ma'am, we're going to need you to step aside," one of them said, his voice carrying that familiar mix of authority and condescension. Maya took a deep breath, remembering the countless times her mentors had prepared her for moments like these. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a folder containing her flight confirmation, her surgical privileges at Seattle Grace Hospital, and the emergency transfer papers for her patient. "I understand there's confusion," she said, her voice steady and clear, "but my patient needs this surgery within the next 6 hours. Every minute we spend here puts their life at greater risk. I've flown with your charter service 8 times in the past year alone." The growing crowd of early morning travelers had begun to notice the scene, some pulling out their phones to record. The security guards exchanged uncertain glances as Maya continued presenting her credentials, each one more impressive than the last. "Look," the businessman interrupted, "I'm sure there's been a mix-up. Perhaps you're meant to be on a commercial flight." His attempt at being helpful only highlighted the assumptions everyone was making. Maya pulled out her phone and dialed a number, putting it on speaker. "Dr. Chen?" "Yes, it's Maya. I'm having some trouble at the airport. Could you confirm the surgery schedule?" The voice that came through was clear and authoritative, describing the critical procedure awaiting her arrival. The security guards' postures shifted slightly, but the clerk remained unmoved. "We'll need to contact the jet company's management to verify all this," he said, reaching for his phone again. Maya nodded, maintaining her professional demeanor even as she noticed her hands trembling slightly with a mixture of frustration and determination. She hadn't worked through medical school, residency, and countless on-call nights to be denied access to her own chartered flight. More importantly, she hadn't overcome every obstacle in her path to let her patient down now. As she watched the clerk make his calls, Maya quietly began documenting everything: names, times, badge numbers. She'd learned long ago that sometimes the best response to prejudice wasn't just proving people wrong in the moment. It was creating a record that could help prevent the same thing from happening to someone else in the future. The tension in the private terminal grew thicker as more people gathered to watch the scene unfold. Maya's phone buzzed again. This time a text from her colleague in Seattle. Patient's family asking for updates. Everything okay? She felt her heart sink, knowing that somewhere across the country, a frightened family was waiting for her arrival. Time wasn't just ticking. It was racing away. The surgery needed to happen within a specific window, and every minute spent dealing with this unnecessary trauma put her patient at greater risk. Maya glanced at her watch. She should have been boarding the jet 15 minutes ago. Two representatives from the private jet company walked in, their matching blue blazers and clipboard-wielding authority making them easy to spot. The younger one, a woman with perfectly styled hair, barely glanced at Maya's stack of credentials before turning to the security team. "We take these situations very seriously," she announced, loud enough for the growing crowd to hear. "Our priority is passenger safety." The way she emphasized passenger made it clear she didn't consider Maya one. Maya's phone rang again. This time, it was the hospital administrator in Seattle. She stepped away from the group to take the call, her voice low but firm. "Yes, I understand the urgency. No, I haven't left yet. There's been a complication with the flight." The word complication felt bitter in her mouth. As she talked, she noticed people in the terminal whispering and pointing. Some looked sympathetic, others suspicious. A young intern from her hospital, who happened to be dropping off some medical documents, recognized her and approached the jet company representatives. "That's Dr. Richardson," the intern exclaimed. "She performed my mother's surgery last month. She's one of the best neurosurgeons on the East Coast." The representatives exchanged glances, but remained unmoved. "We have protocols," the older one stated flatly. "We need to verify everything. You understand, given the circumstances." Maya ended her call and walked back to the group, her patience wearing thin, but her resolve stronger than ever. She'd faced doubters her entire career, in medical school, during her residency, even sometimes from patients who'd question her abilities until they learned about her reputation. But this was different. This time, someone's life literally hung in the balance. She pulled out her laptop and opened her email. "Here's my surgical schedule for the past month. Here's the hospital board meeting minutes where I was appointed department head last year. Here's my pilot's license. Yes, I'm also a licensed pilot, though I prefer to have someone else fly when I'm preparing for surgery." The crowd had grown larger, and Maya could hear murmurs of support mixing with the still present skepticism. Some passengers scheduled for other flights were now delaying their own departures to watch the situation unfold. "My patient," Maya said, her voice carrying across the terminal, "is a 12-year-old child who needs urgent neural surgery. Every minute we waste here." She paused, collecting herself. "I don't want to make this a bigger issue than it needs to be. I just want to do my job." A senior flight attendant who had been quietly observing the scene finally stepped forward. "I've flown with Dr. Richardson before," she said softly to the representatives. "Multiple times. There's never been any issue." But the company representatives were now huddled over their phones, frantically texting and making calls. Maya could see her chances of making the surgery window slipping away. She'd spent her entire career saving lives, breaking barriers, and proving herself over and over again. Now, standing in this terminal, she realized that sometimes the biggest obstacles aren't the complex medical procedures or the difficult diagnoses. They're the simple human moments where prejudice and protocol collide. Maya took a deep breath and stepped away from the growing crowd in the terminal. Years of handling high-pressure situations in the operating room had taught her that the calmest person in the room often held the most power. She found a quiet corner and pulled out her phone, her fingers moving swiftly across the screen as she put her plan into action. First, she called her hospital's chief of surgery. "I need you to send an official letter to the jet company's corporate office," she explained quietly. "Yes, right now." She could hear papers shuffling on the other end as her colleague jumped into action. While waiting, she noticed a young woman in the terminal recording the scene on her phone. Instead of asking her to stop, Maya gave her a small nod. Documentation wasn't just about paperwork anymore. Sometimes it took social media to shine a light on these moments. Her next call was to her mentor, a respected figure in the medical community who also happened to sit on several hospital boards. "Remember the conversation we had about changing things from the inside?" she said into the phone. "Well, I'm having one of those moments." The jet company representatives were still huddled near the desk, looking increasingly uncomfortable as calls started coming in from their corporate office. Maya noticed their body language changing, shoulders tensing, faces growing worried. She'd seen that look before, the moment when people realize they've made a serious misjudgment. A gentle tap on her shoulder made her turn around. An elderly couple who had been watching the scene unfold handed her a bottle of water. "We've been here since the beginning," the woman whispered. "We're not leaving until they make this right." Maya smiled gratefully, touched by this simple act of kindness. She took a sip of water and continued her strategic response. Opening her laptop one more time, she pulled up her impressive record of chartered flights with the company. Dates, times, destinations, all meticulously documented. She'd learned early in her career that being exceptional wasn't always enough. Sometimes you needed receipts. Her phone buzzed with a message from her patient's parents in Seattle. Instead of responding with the whole truth, she sent a reassuring message. "On my way soon. Your daughter is in good hands." She'd learned that keeping patients calm was just as important as solving the problem standing in your way. The terminal had grown quieter now, the early morning rush giving way to a tense waiting game. Maya used this time to document everything: the names of the security guards, the timestamps of each interaction, the badge numbers of everyone involved. Her hand moved steadily across her notepad, each detail potentially important for what would come next. She noticed some of the other passengers who had witnessed the scene were now on their phones too, some talking in hushed voices about what they'd seen. The power of collective witness, she thought, remembering how many times in history change had started with people simply paying attention. The flight attendant who had spoken up earlier walked past again, this time slipping Maya a note with her contact information. "I've worked here for 15 years, she whispered. "This needs to change." Maya tucked the note carefully into her pocket, adding another ally to her growing network. Finally, her hospital's legal team called back. She put them on speaker, letting their authoritative voices carry just far enough for the company representatives to hear. The conversation was brief but effective. Terms like liability and discrimination had a way of cutting through bureaucratic obstacles. Through it all, Maya maintained her professional demeanor. She'd learned long ago that anger, no matter how justified, rarely opened doors. Instead, she let her actions speak. Each phone call, each document, each calm response building a case that was becoming impossible to ignore. The terminal clock showed nearly an hour had passed since she'd first arrived. But instead of feeling defeated, Maya felt a familiar sense of focus, the same one she got in the operating room when faced with a challenging case. Some battles were fought with surgical tools, others with patience, preparation, and the quiet strength that comes from knowing you're fighting not just for yourself, but for every person who would come after you. The atmosphere in the terminal shifted suddenly as a tall woman in an expensive suit walked through the doors. Her presence commanded attention, and the jet company representatives straightened up immediately. This was the regional director, and the look on her face suggested she'd already been briefed about the situation. The director walked directly to Maya, extending her hand. "Dr. Richardson, I apologize for the delay in my arrival." Her voice carried the weight of authority and genuine concern. "I've just reviewed the security footage from this morning." The same security guards who had confronted Maya earlier now stood awkwardly to the side, their earlier confidence replaced with visible discomfort. On the director's tablet, camera footage played silently, showing other passengers walking freely to their flights while Maya faced intense scrutiny. "Please, come with me," the director said, gesturing toward a private office. Maya followed, but not before catching glimpses of people in the terminal, giving her supportive nods. The young woman who had been recording earlier gave her a thumbs up. Inside the office, the reality of what had happened began to sink in. The director pulled up more footage, showing the stark difference in how various passengers had been treated that morning. "This is unacceptable," she said, shaking her head. "Completely unacceptable." Maya watched the videos, her heart heavy, but her spirit strengthening. She saw herself maintaining composure while being questioned, staying professional while others around her let their biases show. The contrast was striking, and now undeniable. "Your flight is being prepared as we speak," the director announced, picking up her phone. "But I hope you'll consider having a longer conversation with us about how we can do better. Your experience. It's not just about today, is it?" Outside the office windows, Maya could see ground crew rushing to prepare her jet. The same clerk who had doubted her earlier was now being spoken to by his supervisor, his face flushed with embarrassment. The businessman who had questioned her presence was nowhere to be seen. Maya's phone lit up with messages from colleagues in Seattle. They'd found a way to buy her a little more time with the patient. Sometimes, she reflected, the medical community could move mountains when it needed to. The flight attendant who had spoken up earlier knocked on the office door. "Dr. Richardson, we're ready when you are." Her smile was warm, genuine, the kind of smile that reminded Maya why she hadn't given up hope for change. As she gathered her things, Maya noticed something remarkable. People in the terminal were talking to each other, sharing their own stories, their own experiences. What had started as her personal challenge had opened up a bigger conversation. Social media was already buzzing with clips from the incident. Comments poured in from other professionals who'd faced similar situations. The hashtag Leatherwork was trending, accompanied by stories of achievement in the face of prejudice. The director walked Maya to her flight, personally ensuring there would be no more delays. "We'll be implementing new training protocols immediately," she assured Maya, "and we'd like your input on them, if you're willing." As she climbed the stairs to the jet, Maya turned to look back at the terminal. The morning sun now streamed through the windows, illuminating the space where, just hours ago, she'd stood her ground. The younger company representative who had doubted her was now watching, a look of realization on her face. The pilot greeted her with respect, apologizing for the delay. As Maya settled into her seat, she allowed herself a small smile. Her patient was waiting, and she would make it in time. But she'd done more than just keep a surgery appointment. She'd cracked open a door that would help others walk through more easily. Her phone buzzed one last time. A message from her mentor. "You didn't just prove them wrong. You showed them how to be better." Maya closed her eyes as the jet engines hummed to life. Sometimes, the biggest victories weren't just about reaching your destination, but about changing the journey for those who would follow. 3 months after the incident at the private terminal, Maya sat in her office reviewing the changes her experience had sparked. Her successful surgery that day had been just the beginning of a much bigger story. The young patient had recovered beautifully, and her parents never knew about the drama that had preceded the operation. Maya believed that was how it should be. Patients deserved to focus on their healing, not the battles their doctors sometimes had to fight to reach them. Her phone lit up with a notification. The private aviation company had just published their new training protocols, with Maya's input woven throughout. She scrolled through the document, noting how they transformed her experience into learning moments for their staff. A knock on her door interrupted her reading. A young medical student stood there, slightly nervous but determined. "Dr. Richardson, I saw what happened at the airport. The video. It went viral. That's why I chose this hospital for my residency." Maya smiled, remembering her own early days in medicine. She'd learned that sometimes the most important changes came from unexpected moments of challenge. The student handed her an article from an aviation industry magazine. Maya's story had become a case study in corporate responsibility and bias training. Her desk calendar showed another meeting with the aviation company's board scheduled for next week. They'd taken her suggestion seriously, creating a diversity advisory council that went beyond just checking boxes. Real experiences, real solutions, real change. The flight attendant who had supported her that day was now heading the company's employee advocacy group. They exchanged regular texts, sharing updates about the small victories. like how the company had revised its passenger verification procedures, making them both more thorough and more respectful. Maya opened her laptop to review some emails. The incident had sparked conversations across different industries. Hospital administrators reached out for advice on their own diversity initiatives. Other professionals shared similar experiences, turning individual stories into collective wisdom. A reminder popped up on her screen. She had a mentoring session in 10 minutes. After the airport incident, Maya had started a formal mentorship program for young professionals facing similar barriers. Lead by lifting became her motto, turning her challenge into an opportunity for others. The clerk who had initially doubted her credentials had written a thoughtful apology letter, asking to be part of the solution. He was now one of the most active participants in the company's new training programs, sharing his learning journey with new employees. Outside her window, the hospital helipad buzzed with activity. Maya watched a medical transport helicopter land, remembering how many doors had to open for her to reach this position. Now she was helping to keep those doors open for others. Her assistant brought in the latest statistics from the aviation company. Reports of bias incidents had dropped significantly since implementing the new protocols. More importantly, employee satisfaction scores had risen. Change, when done right, lifted everyone. Maya's phone rang. It was the regional director from that day. They developed an unexpected alliance, working together to transform company culture from the inside out. The new training video is ready for your review, the director said. Your story is helping us do better. As she ended the call, Maya noticed a small frame on her wall. Inside was her very first pilot's license. She'd framed it alongside her medical credentials after the incident, a reminder that capabilities couldn't be judged by appearances. The sun was setting over the city as Maya prepared to head home. Her next charter flight was scheduled for tomorrow, to perform another critical surgery. This time, she knew the check-in would be smooth, but more importantly, she knew her experience had helped pave the way for others. Walking through the hospital corridors, Maya passed young doctors and nurses of all backgrounds, each carrying their own dreams and determination. The security guard at the exit gave her a respectful nod, a small gesture that reminded her how far things had come. In her car, she glanced at her hospital ID badge and smiled. Sometimes the biggest changes started with one person refusing to back down, one moment of standing firm, one opportunity to transform an obstacle into a gateway. Her story hadn't just proved people wrong. It had helped show them a better way forward. 1 year after the incident, Maya stood at a podium in a packed conference hall, addressing the National Medical Transportation Summit. The audience included representatives from every major private aviation company, hospital transport service, and medical facility across the country. Her presentation slides showed remarkable statistics. Dozens of companies had adopted similar training programs, patient transport delays due to bias had decreased by 60%, and emergency medical response times had improved across all demographics. During the coffee break, a group of young medical professionals surrounded her table. One young doctor shared how she'd faced a similar situation but had known exactly what to do because of Maya's widely shared story. Another mentioned how their hospital had completely revamped their emergency transport protocols after hearing about Maya's experience. The private aviation company that had once doubted her had become an industry leader in inclusive practices. They'd created a scholarship program for aspiring pilots from underrepresented backgrounds, naming it after Maya, though she'd insisted it be called the Future Wings Initiative instead. Maya's phone buzzed with a message from her old patient's family. Their daughter had just been accepted to medical school, inspired by the doctor who'd fought to save her life. They'd never known of the airport incident until the story went viral, and now their daughter wanted to create her own legacy of change. Back in her hotel room that evening, Maya found an envelope under her door. Inside was a letter from the terminal security team from that day, explaining how her composure and determination had changed not just their procedures, but their perspectives. they'd become advocates for change within their own department. 2 years to the day after the terminal incident, Maya walked through a very different airport scene. She was there to inaugurate a new training center, a joint venture between medical institutions and aviation companies focused on creating inclusive emergency medical transport systems. The center's walls displayed photos and stories of medical professionals from all backgrounds who'd faced similar challenges. But more importantly, it showcased the solutions and changes they'd helped implement. Maya's story was just one among many now, exactly as she'd hoped it would be. During the ribbon-cutting ceremony, she noticed a familiar face in the crowd, the young woman who had recorded the original incident. She was now a documentary filmmaker, capturing stories of positive change in professional spaces. Her latest project showcased how one moment of standing firm could transform entire industries. The training center's first class included a diverse group of medical professionals, pilots, and aviation staff. They would learn not just procedures and protocols, but the human side of emergency medical transport, how to recognize and overcome bias, how to advocate for positive change, and how to support others facing similar challenges. Maya watched as the regional director who had helped her that day led the first training session. They had become unexpected allies in the fight for change, proving that sometimes the best partnerships come from the most challenging moments. As she headed to her car, Maya passed the wall of commitments, where visitors could write their pledges for creating positive change. Among hundreds of notes, one caught her eye. Because of you, I knew I could stand my ground. Because of you, I didn't have to stand alone. That evening, preparing for another emergency surgery, Maya reflected on how far things had come. The incident that could have been just another barrier had instead become a bridge, not just for her, but for countless others who would follow. Her story had proved that sometimes the greatest victories come not from proving others wrong, but from showing everyone a better way forward. The next generation of medical professionals would face their own challenges, but they would face them with more allies, better systems, and clearer paths forward. And somewhere in that future, Maya hoped, they would look back and see that change often started with one person who simply refused to let others define their capabilities.